Welcome to Last Turn, and this is our second episode of a podcast trying to make you better at Hearthstone. So I'm Bart, my tag is Driller, and joining me today is...
Evan, and my tag is Magnus.
Great. So today we want to talk a little bit about the Un'Goro metagame. So what has happened since the set dropped, how have things changed since our last discussion, what kind of decks have come around. So I think there's a lot to talk about. So there's definitely some newer threats, some stuff that's really specific to Un'Goro, but there's also some old haunts that are sort of back and perhaps here to stay for an indeterminate amount of time. So why don't we talk about some of the things that we've seen that have been a little new. So the creature-based control decks. I'm talking specifically about the Control Paladin and the Taunt Warrior decks, which are very much control in flavor, but pretty different from what we've seen in the past. So what do you think about these?
Paladin hadn't really been doing a lot for a while. I think that at the beginning of Un'Goro, people were really focused on the quests, and the Paladin quest is one of the worst ones. You know, that's just really the truth of it. It has one of the... I think maybe even least meaningful rewards. I actually did open the Paladin quest. It was the only quest I opened on day one.
I was watching that.
So I have played the deck, and like it would win sometimes, but like playing Gastrodon is definitely good. But ultimately, since that quest was pretty uninspiring compared to all the other ones, like the Hunter one people were so excited about, that no one was just really playing Paladin. And then really first came these really slow control Paladins using Stonehill Defender, or even mid-range, you could call them. I have no idea who first was playing one, but there was like one day, like 3 weeks ago, where... Oh no. Somewhere between 2 or 3 weeks ago, where I would check to see who was streaming, and they were all every pro I watched was playing this mid-range / control Paladin deck with Stonehill Defenders, Tyrion, that kind of stuff. They're all slightly different, but they all had Curator, Hydrologist, some beasts, and sometimes some dragons. Usually some dragons.
Yeah, so I think you and I have both played plenty of this deck. I remember you telling me about it, and then I gave it a shot, and I played it.
So much fun.
Oh, it's great. Oh, it's so good.
So much fun.
I love Paladin control decks a lot, so I was a huge fan of Anyfin, and this has a lot of the same concepts, a lot of the same cards in it.
This is a little bit like Anyfin, but not like there's no climax kind of deal. It's really just a lot more grindy.
Definitely.
Definitely that aspect is similar. I guess no, actually that's not. That's a similarity between the Taunt Warrior deck and Anyfin. Is that climax?
Yeah, but I think I do think there's an important difference. So Anyfin at the end felt like you were playing chess and you were sort of backing your opponent into a corner with your card sequences. You saw that you were going to win 2 or 3 turns before you actually did, and your opponent saw it too.
Sulfuris is not quite that powerful.
No, Sulfuris is more just like hero power face, hero power face, hero power face, GG.
Hopefully.
Yeah, that's the ideal sequence, or not. So
what's the one drop? I forget the name in Hunter. Alley Cat.
Alley Cat, yeah.
It's just like Sulfuris against that card. Like, oh my god, this card is terrible. Or Firefly.
Oh yeah, I mean,
like nice quest reward.
Yeah, my one drop eats that, no problem. You're not even gaining armor anymore. Yeah, when I started running the Paladin deck, I was playing Vine Cleaver, and Vine Cleaver did a pretty decent job of dealing with the Warrior quest as well.
Vine Cleaver smashes Sulfuris.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing.
And that card is really fun too. I think that's actually part of why this Paladin deck became popular, is because it has a good game against Taunt Warrior, because your hero power almost counters their hero power when they Sulfuris.
Yeah, so I definitely think that's a big role player. Additionally, Stonehill Defender is just absolutely disgusting in Paladin.
Yeah, I think that was also not appreciated early on.
Yes.
Like, early on, like, I think people really would just want to play the quest decks or play sort of the more obvious things, and then after a week or two, people start to really look harder at the individual cards. And one card that somebody looked at harder was Stonehill Defender, and thought about how, hey, this is more likely to give me a class card. What are the taunts in each class? And then when they got to Paladin, like, my god, they're all either like legendary or that gigantic 6/6 that gives Divine Shield.
Yeah.
But and it turns out that the 3/7 taunt is also really good. I think that's an Tarim, Sunkeeper Tarim.
Sunkeeper Tarim, yeah.
He was not appreciated at first either. And then people realize, like, whoa, this card is insane.
He's very powerful. He is an extremely powerful card. So that's an effect that I also really underestimated, but Paladin can build out a board pretty quickly. Even if you're not, going as deep as Lost in the Jungle or Vine Cleaver, even if you're just hitting your hero power and grinding them out and playing Hydrologist and stuff, your Tarim can swing the board really hard. Not only, it'll simultaneously build your board and weaken theirs. So it's like playing Evolve and Devolve at once, but you also get a 3/7.
Yeah, it's kind of extraordinary. They can just have two really good guys, and you can have like just a Silverhand Recruit, and you can hero power Tarim, and suddenly you have way more than they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like they could have had, like the two 8/8s, and now they're like, oh my god, I'm behind. And you spent one card, like it's so, and it can do much more. So the next evolution from that deck, I'd say about a week after that, so 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, Murloc Paladin started to become really popular.
Oh yeah.
Because people realize that, hey, if I have like 6 Murlocs out and then I play Sunkeeper Tarim, that's 18 damage. They overhauled Tarim, and it turns out that cards like the 2/3 for 2, I think it's Sun Rock Hauler Murloc. I don't remember his name. But he's a 2/3 for 2. Gives +1/+1 battle cry. Card's really strong. And Vilefin Inquisitor. That was the one. The 1 mana 1/3 that makes your hero power the ability to summon 1/1 Murloc.
Yeah, absolutely.
That card is what made Murloc Paladin such a thing, and makes Murloc Paladin so powerful. That card's really good.
It's very strong with War Leader.
Yeah, it's a 1 mana 4/4, which is nasty, but just having a 1 mana 1/3 is really good in this meta, because there's a good chance your opponent's playing Pirates, and you can start fighting their 1/1s and 2/1s immediately. Or they're playing Aggro Druid or Rogue, and beating up their 1/1s and 2/1s early is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, even though we started this discussion by mentioning some of the creature-based control backs, we should definitely circle back and talk a little bit about Taunt Warrior. I do think that the metagame is dominated by faster decks, or at least decks that are a little lower to the ground. So Murloc Paladin is certainly lower to the ground than the control mid-range Paladin deck. And some builds of it are almost as fast as Pirate Warrior, which is still around. That's still a deck.
Yeah, that's another part of the metagame.
Yeah, it seems to be here to stay. At least it's not. At least they don't have ships cannon.
Yeah, but it's still bigger than any T-Rex or Brontosaurus.
It's definitely true.
Small time Buccaneer is bigger than all the dinosaurs, and he's not even good enough pirate.
No, it's that deck has been super strong. But so just in an environment where Pirate Warrior and similarly speeded decks are the clock, just having smaller minions like a 1/3 Vilefin Inquisitor is just really valuable.
I think that's a big part of what makes the deck so effective, and why Murloc Paladin versus Murloc some other deck. I think he would be the answer. If you had to pick one card, it would be him. But Hydrologist does not hurt.
No.
That is probably like the best Murloc.
That card's insane.
Yeah. Like in a Void, it's probably the best Murloc.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to evaluate a tribe in a Void, but I definitely do agree with you in terms of single card advantage. What the face of the card is, the Hydrologist is just massive. So two drops that draw a card are, or do something like draw a card, discover a card, are historically really powerful. So Dark Peddler is another notable example. The card is disgusting. We've definitely discussed him.
Discussed.
So, these cards, these types of cards are just very strong. So I think another deck that's worth mentioning that is new is Token Druid.
Yep. That was not around at the start. People were playing the quest and playing 5 power minions.
Yep, but 5 power is just not good enough. So the Token Druid deck is really greedy. Definitely the greediest of the decks we're talking about. This deck has like 3 cards that cost more than 3 mana. The whole deck is just filled with 1-drops like Enchanted Raven and Firefly, crabs. You got Hungry Crab and Galactic Crawler in there.
So many crabs.
Oh my god, it's got a lot of crabs.
Crab Central.
It has Finja and it has the Murloc package, the Bluegill Warriors and the Murloc War Leaders. It has Savage Roar, our good friend. But it also has a new card, Living Mana.
Yes, the new Force of Nature.
The new Force of Nature. So the people who brought you Force of Nature comes Living Mana, which is just like almost entirely strictly better. So Living Mana has actually been really great. I played this deck a bunch in the last couple days, and I was really impressed with that card. So the goal,
pretty powerful.
It's really strong. The goal of the deck is to just the goal is to jam out a lot of small minions really fast, quickly amass a board that's going to be very hard for your opponent to beat, and then if they do manage to Hellfire you or something like that, you have Living Mana to back it up. So you don't even care about committing as hard as you can to the board because you just have the best possible plan B. Like, if anything, you're really happy that all your dorks are dead so that you can get all your tutus.
Yeah, it's probably a step up.
From your Fireflies, definitely.
And ultimately, they're going to have to deal with them, and so you just get your mana back. It's not like, oh, I don't have mana, I can't play the game now. Like, they're going to have to kill them, and you're going to have mana. And there's a good chance you can pump them. You're running the 2 mark thing, the 1 mana plus almost 1 to your guys. 2 Power of the Wild plus almost 1 to your guys, and 2 Savage Roar.
Yeah.
So they kill 1 or 2, and then you can just you use 6 cards that are just gonna make all of your guys more resilient, or just kill them.
So you also have a Mark of Yasharj in the deck, which is +2/+2, and if it's a beast, you draw a card for 2 mana. So
yeah.
That card is that card looks pretty dorky, but if you ever
it makes the crabs a lot better.
It makes your crabs a lot better. Your Enchanted Raven is also really good. I mean, I was on the play the other day, and I had a game where I played an Enchanted Raven, and then I innervated Mark of Discharge. So my opponent was on 0 mana, and I had a 4/4. That was a fun and easy game.
I just saw some playing Mark of the Wild, the +2/+2.
Isn't that?
And taunt.
Oh, I see. Oh, right. Interesting.
Just like they wanted like a 3rd Mark of Yasharj, and they're like, taunt's good right now. There's pirates everywhere. I'll play this card.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you make trading difficult for them, then that kind of card could work. Especially nice if you're playing like Vicious Fledgling. So some builds run that card. So Vicious.
Oh, that's the 3 mana 3/3 that when it attacks an enemy hero, it adapts.
That's the one.
And it was easy for people to undervalue that one, but then people realized, wait, you have a 3 out of 10 shot at getting Wind Fury, and then attacking again and adapting again. So that's just like horrifying. Or you attack them once and you like give it stealth. So that's another like huge like effect to get, because now you're definitely gonna get to adapt again. Or something like Divine Shield at 3 health makes it very unlikely it's going to die. And then, you can pump it, like with Mark of Yasharj or Mark of the Wild, apparently. Or any of you just +1/+1 to everything things. It's really clutch to have something that can potentially Wind Fury because of Savage Roar as well. Like, that thing can just solo your opponent with a Savage Roar.
Yeah, so it's been a very strong card. When I saw it in the lists, I was absolutely not expecting it to be as good as it is. It seems like
it's underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like an arena all-star, but it's actually good enough. It's good enough for constructed, which is pretty cool. So I do think we should mention Taunt Warrior. So I think that this deck
Yeah.
saw a little bit more play at the end of last season, at the end of April.
Mm.
I haven't seen a whole lot of it too recently, but I do think it's being played. So this is, of course, the quest deck. I guess one of the only quest decks that's still around. There's still Crystal Rogue, but it's not.
I've been playing that one.
That is a good one. So the goal of Taunt Warrior is to just play taunt minions and hope to get Sulfuras and then start dealing 8 damage to your opponent a lot of times. So this
it works pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Warrior has always had a traditionally strong long game, and it has cards that allow it to go out to a long game and do pretty well between executes and shield slams and brawls. And this deck is also just jam-packed with massive taunt creatures. And if you remember the Mean Streets meta, one taunt creature is often enough to shut down a fast low-to-the-ground aggro deck. So this deck is just chock full of them.
Yeah, it just continues to play them every turn, or at least that's what you're hoping to do.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you get through the first 2-7, if another one comes after that, it's usually a bad sign.
And there's also a great card that they printed is Primordial Drake, the 4/8 taunt dragon, and that just goes so well in this Taunt Warrior deck along with Curator. So that it just has this card advantage as well, and Primordial Drake is just excellent. It's even more we're talking about playing a big taunt and how good that is against aggro, but also blasting everything for 2 on top of that. It's really hard to beat.
Yeah, so
and you got Brawl
to
blow everything up.
Primordial Drake has been really good. That is a card that has popped out as a really big role player and a very important component of late game for a lot of decks, and it's also a really improved Curator. So I think one concern I had, and probably that we both had, was after Azure Drake goes away, what is Curator going to grab? What's that dragon slot? Turns out it's Primordial Drake.
Yeah, for the most part, that's the answer.
Yep.
Primordial Drake's also pretty good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But Primordial Drake is almost always worth it. You usually don't want to be paying 8 mana for something, but this, does so much work on the battle cry, and it's going to absorb 8 damage at least,
Absolutely.
So it's really effective defensively, so it doesn't have the problem of, playing an 8 mana 9/9, that did the same thing where they could just be like, alright, I attack you and kill you. Yeah. This is taunt, so, and 4 power, really good against, Priest.
It's got that sweet
spot.
Just
an excellent card, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, though. I mean, what makes this card worth 8 mana is the fact that, it's a taunt right away, it affects your opponent's decisions, but it also has the battle cry that, sweeps everything. So even if they do have an answer for it immediately, chances are you've done some damage. And if you're playing Warrior, you can follow that up with an Execute if you're on 10 mana, and that deck can get to 10 mana no problem. So,
or sleep with the fishes.
Oh yeah, or you could just completely blow them out. Basically, staple a board wipe to that thing. Staple a brawl that you always win.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually do one better in Paladin. Once again, because it's 8 mana, you're able to equality and play that thing.
Oh yeah,
which is just brutal.
Yeah, I think that shores up one of Paladin's biggest weaknesses, in my opinion, is that it doesn't have Dragonfire Potion. It doesn't have Twisting Nether.
Yeah.
It has Equality. Equality is a great card, but it's sort of a lock and key kind of situation. If you are empty-handed and you top deck an Equality, you are not saved. But this just adds another card to the deck that can pair up with Equality to produce Equality board wipe.
Which is very nice, and sometimes needing to have 10 mana sucks, but sometimes you can play the Equality turn 7 and then Drake turn 8. It depends on how much life you have.
Totally.
I definitely at least once Equality'd and hero powered and passed, and then played the Drake the next turn, and they had to deal with the 1/1 with their weapon because all their guys had 1 health now. So it absorbed some damage that it wouldn't have absorbed had I not played Equality, and then I killed everything and got a 4/8 taunt, and we were just ready to roll from there.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, that's a great card. And yeah, I think Taunt Warrior had an effect on what kind of control decks could work. Because of how brutal it suddenly gets if you take your time against them.
Yeah, it's true. So that one definitely has a really strong bit of inevitability. So one of the strongest turn for turn late games that there is. I think another deck in that category is Jade Druid.
Yeah.
That just reaches this late game where turn for turn they're definitely doing something more powerful than you, and if you try to grind them out to infinity, you're going to lose because they're going to just do something better. Old control decks of the past like Fatigue Warrior, they didn't actually have to have a win condition. Their win condition was just never losing.
Yeah, eventually their opponent just runs out of stuff because your cards are better than them. But then when there's Jade Idols that can get shuffled into their deck, they do have something they can do. They can play a bigger Jade Idol, or bigger Jade Golem rather. And they can do that indefinitely.
So I think another set of important decks to talk about are the Arcanologist and Medivh's Valet Mage decks.
It can really beat anything sometimes, partly just because how good Ice Block is. And yeah, the fact that it has all these minions can allow it to do a ton of damage to a control deck early. And then late game, you can deal a lot of damage depending on what you need because you have all these cards that discover stuff. So that's the other thing that's really cool about these mage decks. The 2 Cabal Courier, the 2 Primordial Glyph. If you need fast cards, you can pick those. If you need long control game cards, another Pyroblast, you can also do that instead.
Yeah, so I think the choices that come out of things like Primordial Glyph is really powerful. And of course, being able to draw your Ice Block every game is really just massive. And get a 2/3.
Yeah, that's another huge thing. The fact that you're twice as likely to get your Ice Block approximately is just insane.
Absolutely. So we all remember how good Mad Scientist was, and Arcanologist is really right up there, surprisingly.
Yeah, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and Medivh's Valet gives the deck the ability to swing the board a little bit early, which is really important. So, Mage is another kind of deck that can go long really well, and it has a long game strategy that is definitely beatable. Burning your face is not something that every deck is susceptible to, but a lot of decks are, especially decks that are going greedy into trying to kill you. Like a deck like Rogue just has no way of recovering lost health.
Yeah, it's not gonna happen. Their best bet would be getting lucky enough to get an Ice Block off of one of their South Sea deckhands or something like that.
Yeah, they're Swashbucklers, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, or Hallucination. So
yes.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a strong strategy, and the addition of these 2 drops that help it survive the early game is really good. And it makes the deck really distinct from the old tempo builds. So I think that they are doing something similar in that they're these proactive mage strategies as opposed to a freeze strategy. They're playing their Mana Worms. Both builds, of course, ran that card. But the older tempo decks were a little bit more concerned with really getting a big Flamewaker turn, and I think that these guys are kind of just about putting out minions and maybe skirmishing for board a little bit. And
yeah, even just
you.
playing your Medivh's Valet turn 2 without a secret's totally fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Against some decks with some hands, that is just a great option.
Yeah.
So it's a really distinct class of deck that's come around. I haven't played with it too much. Have you played with it much?
Yeah, it's brutal with Medivh. That's one of the sort of cards that lets you win against any control deck. When your spells all start giving you minions, you just never run out.
Sure.
And then Pyroblast is really important too because very often you sort of turn a corner. For the beginning of the game, you're playing your 2/3s, and they're good enough, and they do good work. But then around turn 4 or 5, you're playing against an aggro deck, they might start to really have some threatening stuff going on. And at that point, you need to be all right, how do I get them to 0? You go from beating up their minions and trying to do a good job being a control deck that uses minions to keep their guys off the board and going for value to being like, all right, I gotta start fireballing them. Turn like 5, 6, 7. It depends on what you're playing against. And Pyroblast does such a good job because as long as you can survive to turn 8 without losing your ice blocks, you can just spend turn 8 and 9 not caring about anything that your opponent does, playing burn spells, and as long as you can get them to 10 or less, you win.
Yeah, it's very strong, and I think that a lot of players will respect that, and you'll see a lot of players start to play a little bit differently once they get low health against a mage deck, and that itself is powerful. That gives you bluff potential. Those sorts of things do come up.
That's true.
It's definitely a strong deck. So I think that there's one deck that we have mentioned and haven't given a lot of credit to, but perhaps deserves all the credit. And I think that's the one. So Pirate Warrior it's still here, much to probably everybody's chagrin. that is a deck that is as strong as ever. So I really thought that this deck would be done after Taunt Warrior came out. So I spent really way more time than I care to admit playing the mid-range Shaman deck back in November, and just knowing what playing a Feral Spirit did to that deck, to the aggressive warrior strategies, which that deck did exist before patches. Just playing Feral Spirit against that deck, usually they just click concede, like that's it. But I figured, okay, now they're adding all these taunt minions that are so good, this deck is just going to be gone. And that's not even remotely true. They just slowed down a little bit. So they added South Sea Captains, and they added Greenskins and the Naga Corsair. The deck has just got a bunch of mid-range fatties that are, classic, slam them down and they're big guys, and you got to deal with them.
4 mana 5/4s were brutal.
Oh yeah, Tomb Pillager.
This just one really great thing is that one of maybe the worst weapons is just the Rusty Hook on its own, and it shores up the Rusty Hook a lot. Rusty Hook is really great with the Naga Corsair.
Oh yeah.
And it's a pirate, so if you have the captain, or if you haven't gotten your patches yet, there it is. So that also has those synergies in addition to filling this four slot really well.
Oh yeah.
Because not like you want to play Mortal Strike on turn 4.
No.
And also South Sea Captain just is not remotely fair if it's getting patches. It's 3 mana for 5 power and 5 health.
Yeah, it's very
so
strong.
much, and two of that can attack. It's so much better than Children of the Yeti. And the fact you could even do that in every deck, like I threw that in a bunch of decks one time just to fill the 3 slot, to have the best 3-drop ever as your 3-drop is pretty good. And there's just all the power in the weapons. Also means that no matter how good of a job you do killing all their stuff, there's still they have a really great way of murdering you anyway.
Yep. Yeah, that's a really strong deck. I'm perhaps a little bit disappointed that it's still around, but I was kind of hoping to see some different strategies, but I mean there definitely have been, so I'm not super duper upset about it, but it's still really strong, and there are some whispers that it's oppressive and wild, where Ship's Cannon does in fact exist. So
I hadn't realized, I had forgotten about the card Ship's Cannon rather, and then you reminded me about it a while ago. I was like, oh my lord.
Yep.
And I just played a few games with Pirate Warrior and Wild. I was like, geez Louise, this is nonsense. And now that Wild suddenly matters, it's like they were racist against it. They were wildest, and now they're like, oh, we accept you now as a real person.
Yeah, I think it's valuable for them to sort of revisit it after the card pool is way bigger.
Yeah, it deserves attention.
Oh yeah.
But whether anything needs banning, I'm not really sure in standard. If it's cancerous enough, or if it's just a good deck, because other decks beat it. That's one of the appeals of the Murloc deck, or Token Druid does a really good job with the crabs.
Yeah, so that's something we should discuss. The crabs and crab type cards. So why don't you tell us which cards you're talking about here?
So there's Galaka Crawler, 2 mana, 2/3. These are both neutral. 2 mana, 2/3. This guy's new, and his battle cry is you destroy a pirate, and if you destroy a pirate, it gets +1/+1. So that can give you a 2 mana 3/4, which is great.
And killer guy.
3/4s are great, and yeah, you also get to destroy their guy. Hungry Crab is a 1 mana 1/2, also neutral, also beast, which is really great, more relevant for some decks. And it destroys a Murloc and gets +2/+2, also making it a 3/4, but for 1 mana.
Yep. So Hungry Crab's a little bit older. So
yeah,
sad story. I actually dusted my pair of Hungry Crabs several months ago because I wanted some legend. Yep, I very sadly crafted them again recently.
Oh my god.
It was not a very happy way to spend 800 dust, I'll tell you that.
Salty crabs.
Those are some salty crabs. Oh my god, those are salty crabs.
Well, I mean, it turns out it's pretty good, and it's sort of ironic. But I don't. Yeah, because there's Pirate Warrior doing really well. People start using Galaka Crawler, including the Murloc Paladin deck. The Murloc Paladin deck uses a bunch of, low to the ground 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana guys. It's like, hey, we want to beat pirates more. Let's use some Galaka Crawlers too.
Mm-hmm.
And then Token Druid, which had already been using Galaka Crawler because it's a beast, to destroy pirates and to give it Mark of Your Charge, is now like, oh, now there's all these Murloc decks, what do we do? Oh, we'll play the other crab. So it's sort of like a chain reaction that happened over the course of like a week or two. And Hunger Crab is once again a really good fit in Token Druid because it just wants bodies that are somewhat durable. 1 mana 1/2 is pretty durable for the cost.
Totally.
And you can Mark of Your Charge and draw a card. So then there's just now the more Murloc Paladin there is, and the more Pirate Warrior there is, the more of these crabs there are going to be. Yeah. And also the better Token Druid is going to do. Token Druid also happens to often play Murlocs, so that might be another reason for you to play Hungry Crab. It's sort of, they feed into each other.
Yeah, so I think Finja's made Murlocs viable in a lot more than just dedicated Murloc tribal decks because it sort of represents the minimum number of Murlocs and the minimum strength you need for Murlocs to be worthwhile, those 5 cards. And Hungry Crab can definitely feed, quite literally, off of those decks. But it can also beat the more dedicated decks like, the Paladin deck. And Galaka Crawler is kind of similar. So a lot of decks run some amount of pirates. I mean, Rogue basically has Patches, and then it has, probably 4 other pirates in it. And then there's Pirate Warrior, which is running just a ton of them. And there's probably other decks that could afford to run some kind of pirate package.
Sometimes Paladin decks run the 1/2s, Bloodsail, Corsair.
Yeah, that's the one. Actually, Druid runs that too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Druid. So Druid actually has pirates and Murlocs.
Totally.
And that deck will do better the more pirate and Murloc decks there are, using the crabs better.
Yeah. So it turns out, actually, it's funny. I didn't really notice that, but it turns out the menagerie is not dragons. What is it? Dragons, Murlocs, and beasts. The menagerie is pirates, Murlocs, and beasts.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Definitely Druid is the menagerie deck, and it kind of makes sense. You stuff the most powerful synergies into a class that can just buff all of its guys and make a ton of them. It's really good. You
also sometimes take advantage of the fact that you can destroy your own minions, especially with Hungry Crab, which gets much larger.
Oh yeah.
But Token Druid loves to do that. They play Bloodsail Corsair, a 1 mana 1/2. And then they bash your guy to kill it. Now it's a 1/1, and then they blow it up with their Galaka Crawler, and now they have this 3/4. And you're like, whoa, it's like way scarier. then the 1/1 would have been next to a 2/3, or Hungry Crab after you attack with your Bluegill Warrior, and just get 2 damage, and you can make a 3/4 for 1 mana.
It's very strong.
And then on the same token, you could be like, hey, I'm playing Pirate Warrior. I can blow up my patches sometimes to make my own Galactic Crawler a 3/4 if I don't play against any pirates. So there's actually more versatility to them. They look extremely narrow. They look like the most narrow things possible.
Yeah.
But they actually do have some subtlety, like the relevance of them being a beast in Druid or also Hunter.
Yeah, totally.
And or the fact that it can be nice to use them on your own minions.
Yeah, so that's something that I definitely would not have guessed until I really drew these cards and was considering paying mana for them, was that I could target my own stuff with them. And I think that pushes them over the edge into playability, because it's obviously a blowout when you get to kill one of your opponent's things with one of these cards. It's just such a board swing.
It's the best feeling.
Yeah, it's just that can just steal a game. Yeah, I mean, have you ever killed the 3/3 taunt with Galactic Crawler? That's just the best thing ever.
I actually have not been playing much Galactic Crawler lately. I've been playing, I've been spelunking. I've been exploring the caverns below, and playing the Quest Rogue deck. And partly because I think things are sort of slower. That's sort of one thing to talk about. Not slower. Paladins are less likely to be running Pyromancer quality and things that can actually stop an army of 5/5s. They're more likely playing Murlocs, and so I'm using 2 Hungry Crabs. So that actually winds up making the Quest Rogue deck better. Is the presence of Murloc decks like Druid, Token Druid, and Murloc Paladin. Also, I was already running 2 Biofin Tidehunter, so I can actually pay 3 mana for a 1/1 taunt. I also get a 2/1 Murloc, and I just blow it up and get a 3/4.
It's really strong.
Or I recently added Murloc Tidehunter, just the original 2 mana 2/1 that makes a 1/1 Murloc, and you can blow that up and get a 2/1 and a 3/4 for 3 mana.
That's really strong, and I mean the ability to interact with your opponent in that deck will just buy you turns, and that's one of those decks that can just convert turns into something really powerful.
Yeah, you really couldn't ask for more out of a card than blowing up one of your opponent's minions.
Definitely.
Especially a 1 mana minion, that's great. That's exactly what you want. Or it could just be a body when you don't have the right draw. I played a game earlier today against the Quest Rogue deck, and they got the Crystal Core out turn 4, and I never finished the quest, and I killed them on turn 7 with just 3/4s and 2/3s and 2/1s.
Sometimes you got your plan B, your beatdown.
Yeah, they didn't play any Murlocs, so I never blew up any of their Murlocs. But I just, smacked them until they died.
you just beat them with an arena deck.
Yes, but pretty efficient minions and a bunch of charge guys is pretty good way to win when you don't get the right draw.
Sure.
So that card has just also been good in Quest Rogue for me. So these cards have a lot going for them. And then another card maybe to mention that's sort of narrow would be Gluttonous Ooze.
Yes, definitely.
That started to show up, I think partly because people started seeing Medivh more. So it made the card more relevant. But it's mostly because of Pirate Warrior.
Yeah, I think that Medivh is sort of a bonus on that ooze, but oozes in general are something we've seen, from last metagame, so from last standard. a lot of people.
It's just as in every Reno deck, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really strong because occasionally you could just, get your opponent's Jiraxis, or if you're playing a Shaman, you can kill one of their things, and there's always Pirate Warrior, and you can slow them down a little bit. And this Ooze is really no different. It does give you, a nice little bonus of the armor, which is really powerful, especially against Pirate Warrior and decks that are going fast. And the 3/3 body's a lot better than the 3/2. But I think the principle's the same. And I think that the Oozes and the Crabs belong to sort of a more general class of narrow hate cards. Harrison Jones is in there, and also Black Knight. Black Knight's often forgotten, but
Silver Bullets.
Yeah, so Silver Bullets, cards that are most of the time just vanilla, but when they hit, they hit. They hit hard. And I think that these play an interesting role in Hearthstone. So some of these are more narrow than others. Hungry Crab's incredibly narrow, and so is Black Knight. Acidic Swamp Ooze is less narrow. And, Harrison Jones is also a little bit less narrow, although probably more narrow than the Ooze. But I think these cards have an interesting effect on the metagame, or on the game in general. I was thinking a little bit about it, and I realized that if there is a narrow hate card that is very playable, that is strong enough to see play in a lot of decks, and strong enough to be worth checking into, so something like Hungry Crab, that actually takes up the slot of an otherwise more powerful card, or a card that will advance that deck's primary game plan. So yeah. I think that those cards have an unfortunate side effect of weakening decks a little bit. So not only do they weaken the decks that they're targeted at, so obviously Murloc-based strategies become weaker when there's a lot of Hungry Crabs running around. Every deck running Hungry Crabs becomes weaker when there's Hungry Crabs going around. Because if you're just playing a non-Murloc strategy into a non-Murloc strategy and you have Hungry Crab in your deck, then you just have a 1-2 for 1 in your deck.
Which usually really blows. Some decks, that's actually exactly what we want, like the Druid deck, especially since it's a beast. But for the most part, yeah, it's just like a dud.
And I think it's worth considering, because, a lot of the decks that are going as deep as Hungry Crab do have a way to trigger themselves, and same thing with Galaka Crawler, so it's not as prevalent as Ooze. It's not like Reno control decks are running it. It's pretty much just showing up in aggressive decks, but that already want it 2/3. But I do think that the presence of these cards does weaken all decks a little bit. And
yeah,
I don't know, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's good for the game?
Well, I mean, I think they've been doing a better job with it. For example, Galaka Crawler is more of like a potentially just like good dude to have in your deck. Because like a 2-mana 2/3 is pretty solid. We talked earlier about how nice they are in Mage. So I think the fact that they made it a little bit less of a dud. I think a 2-mana 2/3 is generally even better than a 2-mana 3/2.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Means that they're doing a better job with it. Also, the fact that it is a beast is another like nuance that makes it better and makes it more relevant in a bunch of ways. So I think if they keep doing that, they make cards like this that have nuance to them and have other ways to put them to work, it's good.
Yeah.
I think overall, it is good that they exist unless they only do the hate thing and nothing else. And then it kind of sucks, actually, I think, for them to exist. Because then it's sort of like sometimes if you play this strategy, someone has this hate card, and you just lose. Like if it's a really, really strong, really, really narrow hate card, like your opponent can't play Pirates.
Yeah, sure.
With 2 mana, your opponent can't play Pirates, so like that. Magic is much worse offender in this area. Really brutal hate cards in Magic the Gathering.
Yep.
Much worse than even what I just described.
Yeah.
Those are not good for the game, I don't think. But having these ways to do better that against potentially 2 decks that are potentially too powerful as an option to players is great. When they can find other ways to use them. It's cool that they put them on minions rather than just being a spell that would do absolutely nothing. So I think it's good.
Yeah, I do think that they're trending in the right direction. It's like you said, if they just did the hate thing, they'd be terrible. Hungry Crab almost falls into that category, but a card like Galaka Crawler it's like the average of a slightly overstated minion and Hungry Crab, because then you just get like a normal set of stats, a totally acceptable set of stats, plus a narrow effect that is potentially very powerful, but it gets less of a buff. So they strengthen the minion and they weaken the hate part, but it still operates as enough hate. So I think that's good. That's definitely the right way to implement hate cards. But I also think that's a dangerous bridge to walk. So we'll do a thought experiment. What if Harrison Jones cost 4 mana? Weapons would be a lot less prevalent, I think. And I think Harrison Jones would be a lot more prevalent.
Yeah, that's true.
So that would warp the metagame potentially. We might get closer to a game like early stage Yu-Gi-Oh, where every deck looked the same and it was just all running the best cards. And Harrison Jones would just belong to that 30 as a neutral, very powerful minion. Maybe to give a Hearthstone example, Dr. Boom. That was in pretty much every list.
Yeah.
Every deck could benefit from Dr. Boom. So I think it's a narrow tightrope they're walking with their hate cards, because the presence of those types of cards does weaken the power of all decks. And if you make them a little too powerful, you could end up hating some strategies out of the metagame altogether, while homogenizing all the decks, which is something that I think they have actively tried to get away from. You can tell that the types of control decks that exist now have very distinct endgames, and I think that they really like that. I think they don't want every deck to just be like, getting out into Zoth with Sludge Belchers and Deathlords, right? They want all the decks' identities to be different. They want Priest to be like shadow forming you infinite times or something like that.
And Mage playing Pyroblast.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or Druid just killing you with like 14 Jades. This is something that they want. They want to see their classes be distinct, and these types of cards do homogenize the decks a little bit.
That's true. Though they run the risk of making a card too strong or too weak every time they make a card.
Absolutely.
And that will always have a non-good effect. To use a really adult word, a non-good effect on the metagame and on the game in general. Whether it's a Harrison Jones or some other card, the Vicious Hatchling. What's the 3-mana 3/3 that when it attacks a hero?
Vicious Fledgling.
Vicious Fledgling adapts. Like if that was 2 mana, that would be bad for the metagame, and certain cards would be worse and better, and that's true for every card.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that this is perhaps more generally an issue with neutral minions, but I think that they've been, because neutrals can go into every deck, but I think that they've recognized how dangerous it is to print extremely powerful neutrals, and they maybe even moved away from it.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned him before. Dr. Boom is probably the worst offender.
Ragnaros, Firelord, Sylvanas, Azure Drake, all other examples.
Oh yeah, I guess Ragnaros and Sylvanas are the worst legendary examples. But that's definitely not good for the game because that's homogenizing.
Yes.
That was the problem. All these decks had to use the same stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that one successful thing about Galaka Crawler and Hungry Crab is that decks use them in different ways. Like, I have my way of using Hungry Crab in my Rogue deck. Other people have found a really cool way to use all the crabs in the Druid deck. And people found a way to use Galaka Crawler really well in Paladin by playing a bunch of Murlocs.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Playing just like an aggressive deck where having a 2-mana 2/3 is just good. Just if I play a deck where playing a 2-mana 2/3 is good, Galaka Crawler is no longer so disappointing.
Yeah, totally. It's I think that they've sort of moved in the right direction, and right now I don't think it's problematic at all. But it is worth noting it's an interesting design space to walk into, and they're brave to go there. Because
I like it. Well, you go first.
I was more or less just going to repeat something you'd already said. So what were you going to say?
I really like this method of keeping the game healthy and in check versus banning stuff or nerfing things. I think that making a card that beats pirates is a lot more fun and a lot more interesting uh, of a solution for the game than banning a bunch of pirates.
Yeah, and I think that Blizzard agrees with you. And
It's just a matter of doing it right, and I think they did a pretty good job this time. And
so
I'm also looking forward to them doing a better job.
so I think that that's a great segue into the next thing we want to mention. So
Yes,
Pirate Warrior's been around for a while. Is it too good?
it very well may be. It's definitely, we were just looking at some statistics, and it's really high win rate, really frequently played. So those are two signs. A sort of like Monopoly situation,
Yeah.
which is never healthy. Not the game Monopoly. We are talking about a game for children.
In the
so-
game in the game Monopoly, Pirate Warrior is Boardwalk.
Yes, basically, or having all the planes. And one thing I didn't mention before, but we sort of talked about how the Galactic Crawler, Hunger Crab, the crabs can be blanks when you draw them against decks that don't use those cards. You can also play against Pirate Warrior and then just get crushed and not draw your Galactic Crawlers.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
then play against Mage and draw both of them. And so that's sort of another thing that is a problem with that being a solution. And a part of the reason why it didn't solve the problem, assuming there is a problem.
Yeah.
It kind of seems like there is. I guess what would be the definition of a problem exactly? I guess is an important question to have answered before you can answer, is Pirate Warrior too good? What is too good?
I think so. That's interesting, and I think that maybe we should step back. I think a couple of years at this point to Patron Warrior, and maybe we can get an answer to that. So,
Yeah.
for those of you who don't remember, those of you who want to trip down memory lane, Patron Warrior was a warrior control deck that had a combo win condition between Grim Patron, one of the old Warsong commanders, Frothing Berserker, and various whirlwind effects. So the goal was to just press your hero power button and do approximately nothing until you did 50 damage to your opponent one turn.
Yeah, through the fact that your Warsong commander could give charge.
Yes.
To your Grim Patrons, anything that had 3 power, not when you played it from your hand, but literally when it came into play from anywhere would get charged. So when Grim Patron made copies of himself, they would be able to attack immediately, being able to get damage again potentially.
Yeah, and Frothing Berserker hits the ground as a 2/4 and then quickly gets out of control. So that also gets charged.
They don't lose charge when they get more power. She just gives it to them permanently if they come in with low enough power. And then now that you've made a ton of Grim Patrons, you then do some kind of whirlwind effect, and your Berserker does a berserk amount of damage.
Yeah, so it's pretty insane. So I think that's a good place to start when discussing whether a deck is a problem, because that's a deck that got nerfed. And I think that a lot of their justification for nerfing that deck is that although there existed counters, the counters themselves were weak to all of the other close to viable decks in the metagame. So this was a deck that got shut down by strategies that were built to prey on it, and those strategies lost to everything else. So
that's kind of fun potentially if you basically know you're gonna win or know you're gonna lose or just have a really hard game, or sometimes from the moment you sit down and see what class you're playing against.
Yeah,
that's not a fun thing for the game.
Yeah, not at all, and it's no fun when you either have to play the deck or play a bad deck to beat it. That's not particularly fun. So I think that the decks right now, at least according to Vicious Syndicate data, I think that everything's pretty balanced. There's a lot of decks that are above 50% win rate, and they're all pretty close to each other, so that's really good. I don't think that we are necessarily in that spot of toxicity that we were in, with regards to Grim Patron, or maybe even Mid-Range Shaman, or the aggressive Shaman build that ran Small Time Buccaneers. I think all of those decks were definitely more imbalanced than the current Pirate Warrior. Maybe Blizzard acknowledges this too, but maybe we can maybe we can envision a world, or maybe we're close to a world where Pirate Warrior is in a similar spot as those decks, where the decks that beat it themselves lose to a lot of the other things in the metagame. I don't think we're there yet, though. I don't think we have that world. I think we're in a different world.
It still mostly just beats everything. So one thing I want to talk about, though, about Grim Patron and Warsong Commander ultimately is the card that got nerfed. Blizzard said that they wanted to weaken it for the reasons you explained about the only decks that could beat it not being really good.
Yeah.
Except anything but that. But another reason that they weakened Warsong Commander was because of how the deck won. And it's because it would just explode and just kill you in one turn.
Right.
And that is something that they think is really a big problem, and not how they want their game to function for the most part. Once again, Magic is different in that regard.
Sure.
But that's not what Blizzard wants, so it wasn't just the win rate, actually, but also how it won. And Pirate Warrior doesn't quite do that as badly, but it still does kind of do that.
I agree.
It will very often just be doing really unfair things the whole game, and then you can, with an Arcanite Reaper, a Heroic Strike, and either Leroy Jenkins or Kor'kron Elite, you're doing a huge amount of damage in one turn. I think it's borderline too much damage in one turn. Or it's hard to say. But I think that's another thing that Blizzard is seriously considering and looking at when they look at statistics is what turn does the deck win on?
Yeah.
And how much damage did it do that turn? Are both things that they're looking at.
Yeah, so they're really careful about non-interactive decks. So Grim Patron, I guess that had a ton of interaction, but it was mostly just removal. And
it was less, I think, at least at the beginning of the game, it was sort of less interactive. It was just hero powering a lot of the time.
Yeah, and maybe playing an Armor Smith or something. But once it started going, it was hard to interact with the combo. And it was impossible to interact with their combo. And Freeze Mage was in a similar spot too, which is maybe why they took out Ice Lance. It's just a deck that it kind of does its own thing all game, and then maybe it kills you, or maybe it doesn't draw the right cards. I think that Pirate Warrior might almost be in that territory, although I think that they have done a good job of printing the hate cards. So the weapon, something that you and I had discussed, Evan, is weapons, and how weapons are just inherently resilient to traditional ways to deal with minion decks, which are to just kill the minions. So
yeah.
Even if your opponent plays, they play N'Zoth's First Mate, and then they upgrade and they play Bloodsail Corsair, and then you wipe their board, they still have 3-power weapon. And they're still going to do really a lot of damage to you. They might even do 50% of your health with that weapon. And
I know, it's ridiculous.
It's really crazy.
And you have no way to interact with it. You have plenty of... You could have 2 Galaka Crawlers in your hand.
Yeah,
you could feel like you're so prepared to fight pirates, but it's actually not the pirates that kill you, it's the weapons.
Yeah, and I mean, you could run your Syntax Swampoos or your Gluttonous Ooze, but even still, if you're jamming that many... Not a lot of decks can afford to devote that many slots to hate cards. Some can.
Now your deck is diluted really badly.
Yeah, so that's that problem territory where the deck becomes just too weak to function, and you kind of have to pick your hate cards. So I think that this ultimately spells weapons being pretty hard to interact with. And I think that that's a lot of the strength of the deck. And yeah, it's like you said, the deck can do a ton of damage from hand. It can just have an Arcanite Reaper and then like Heroic Strike Leroy and smack you for, a lot. Smack you for 15. And that's a lot for a deck that is not a combo deck. That's a deck that's really just trying to play minions and attack you, but it also has an insane burst potential. So it is potentially in dangerous territory, but I do think that the win rates of that deck and all of the other deck and their relative win rates and the sort of how they match up against each other, I don't think we're in toxic territory yet, but we could be.
It's definitely uninteractive, though, because it can basically just get these god hands where you can't do anything and it doesn't matter what you do. It just puts too much power on the board, even if you had your hate cards. it can still just do too much too fast and have too much synergy. And a lot of it comes from upgrade,
Mm.
Bloodsail Cultist, N'Zoth's First Mate, just giving +1/+1, giving that extra durability and the extra power to your weapons, just gives so much damage, especially after you do it twice or three times. That's when it gets really, unbeatable.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, this deck is really strong. It does its damage really quick. It has some hands that just feel completely unbeatable. Both in the seat playing the deck and playing against it. Sometimes you feel like you just never ever had a chance at all.
Which is not fun.
No, that's not particularly fun. I agree. I don't think that's particularly fun. Right now, I don't think it needs a nerf, but it could in the future, and it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, I think I actually kind of I have suggestions for nerfs.
Oh, let's hear them.
So I think the three cards to look at would be N'Zoth's First Mate.
AKA Muster for Battle.
Yes. And nothing would really be effective and fun enough except making it more mana. I think it could be a 2-mana 1/1 and still be a really good card.
I think it was a 2-mana 1/2 would be great still.
Yeah, or it could be a 1/2 or a 2/1. It sort of looks more like a 1/2. So a 2-mana 1/2 so that's one change. Usually they like to change 3 cards.
Sure.
If they're not just changing one most obvious card. I know that's another tricky thing about the Pirate Warrior problem right now is it's not just one card.
It's the synergy.
Just doing that N'Zoth's First Mate thing wouldn't solve the problem. And it is nice that it can maintain its identity as a pirate that gives you a weapon. Then Bloodsail Occultist, it probably just should give +1/+0.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Or really make it quite a bit smaller. But I think if it just give +1/+0, that would be a big improvement. And it could stay a 3/4, or it might need to be like 2/3 or 3/2. One of those two. That's kind of I'm not sure how they would want to go with that. I think making it a 2/3 would be a good solution too, though.
I think a 2/3 or a 3/2.
Because part of the problem is that it's so friggin' big.
Yeah.
A 3-mana 3/4 that does that much. That's too much. So either not make it this amazing efficient thing by weakening its body or by weakening its effect would be good. Though if you want to get away from uninteractive situations, making the pump only on the power, making it +1/+0 to your weapon would be the way you would want to go. And then the third card, I mean, do I think Patches needs to be nerfed? I don't know. That's a whole different question.
Yes.
But there's also nerfing those two might be enough. But if there has to be a third card, and this is something that I'd like to hear what you think about, is the 2/1 charge, Sassy Deckhand. Maybe giving it the quality that the beast, the big T-Rex has, the 8-mana T-Rex. It has Battle Cry.
Oh yeah.
Cannot attack heroes this turn.
So
because that would also help potentially with another very cancerous uninteractive deck, the Quest Rogue deck that I'm playing.
Yes, right, the one you're playing.
That deck would be much less of an explosive, obnoxious deck if it lost half of its charge minions.
Yeah, so...
Actually, that's not even half of them. That's not even half of them. So that would actually sort of be killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah, it's so charge is something that they've had a hard time balancing. It's just really, really strong, and they've nerfed a ton of charge minions and a ton of minions that have given charge because it leads to this the uninteractive nature of some strategies. So I think that's an interesting proposition. So Deckhand is not a card that I think is super strong in Pirate Warrior. I think if you wanted to weaken that deck, you would really want to hit the cards that gave weapon durability. So I think that Cultist is probably one of the strongest cards in the deck, if not just pound for pound the most efficient card.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just giving you another Fire War Axe swing is like massive in terms of percentage of your health. It's more than 10% of your health.
Yeah, I think since it's Pirate Warrior, nerfing the 2 pirates that only Warrior can use is like really appropriate.
Yeah.
As opposed to nerfing Upgrade. That was a card that crossed my mind, but that's really just a Warrior-ish card that gives Warrior identity. It would really suck to have to touch that card.
Yeah, and Fire War Axe, same thing.
Yeah, same. Really, touching Fire War Axe, hell, no.
Yeah, that's sacred.
Yeah, I know it's a really good card, but it's not on the level of Ice Lance, where when it's good, it's obnoxiously good.
Yeah.
Unless it's because of, I think, these other cards, because of the pirates. So that's one other reason I like my idea for my idea for the nerfs is that you do actually just nerf pirates.
Yeah.
And that feels like a good, if I'm a player, I'm less likely to be upset that they weakened cards to stop this one deck if they are in the name. If you're someone that loves playing Upgrade with Gorehowl in your Control Warrior deck, you'd be really bummed out if they nerfed Upgrade because of Pirate Warrior.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the fact that you could really make sure you only hurt that deck is another appealing thing about nerfing only those cards.
Yeah, I think First Mate and Cultist are probably the most efficient cards in the deck, and I do agree. I think that hitting Fire War Axe is probably bad for the class. It's such a class identity card. It's really, really, really strong, but in terms of numbers, it's just a smidge better than other 2-mana weapons, so it's not super, it's not just wildly overpowered. If you tune basically any of the numbers, the card goes into mediocre territory.
Or if you bring them up, then it's, you would marry the card.
Yeah, right.
If it had another power, another durability, sweet Jesus, you would never play a class besides Warrior.
Yeah, but
you would always play 4 oozes.
if you reduce, if you raise the cost, it's just weaker Rallying Blade. If you reduce the power, it's just weaker Jade Claws. There's a lot of it's hard to touch that card, and I don't think they should. I think it's in a fine spot.
It sort of defines the power of weapons in general.
I think so. Yeah.
A great way to evaluate a weapon is how good is this compared to Fire War Axe?
Definitely, that is a great way to think about it. So I really like. I don't know if I like South Sea Deckhand nerfs as much as I like the Cultist nerf and the N'Zoth's First Mate.
The class specific ones. I feel the same way, but you gotta admit that it could maybe make things less uninteractive.
I do agree. So, it's what I had mentioned a little bit earlier is that the charge is historically very powerful, and that's really reflected in Blizzard's balance changes. They have changed they changed Arcane Golem. That's a card that was just apparently too good,
Mm-hmm.
And that card was not, at the time, it wasn't really on my radar. I knew it was good, but I didn't think it was bad. It was, nerf worthy. But it has charge, and charge is dangerous.
It just was showing up everywhere. It was in Control. Reno decks were just nothing's better than just blowing your opponent up out of nowhere, so I can use Arcane Golem.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Blizzard's trying to avoid.
Yep. And they've hit it a couple times with some decent charge minions. They've sort of struck a sweet spot of powerful but not too powerful, Argent Horse Rider is a good example. Cards
I love that card, and I'm glad that they haven't had to touch it. Isn't the card's called Charge, and they nerfed that card too, right?
I actually don't remember. Did they? I guess they did. And it was a random nerf. I remember they nerfed that, and I was very confused about it.
It used to be 3 mana, and it would give +2/+0 and charge.
Oh.
And now just gives charge, and it can't attack heroes' turns.
Yeah, that's a good
less mana.
Good solution. So they charge is a little dangerous. So I do agree that maybe Deckhand is I think if they nerfed Deckhand, that would be the patches nerf. So, Bloodsail Corsair is good enough, so Tokens runs Bloodsail Corsair and it runs patches, and that's like enough to make patches worthwhile. But decks that can run Deckhand profitably, like Rogue, they really prefer that to Bloodsail Corsair. It is definitely a better one, and especially in Quest Rogue, that card's awesome. It's just a 5/5 charge for 1 mana. And that's a good card. So, charge is really powerful. That's definitely something worth considering. I don't think that would really affect Pirate Warrior that much, so I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I do think that it would get rid of some of the more toxic elements of some other decks while also weakening Pirate Warrior.
Which might make it worth it. That's the way. I guess the exercise I was doing was we have to nerf 3 cards to fix.
I see.
Pirate Warrior. What would those? What 3 would you pick, Evan? Ben Brode comes up to me and is like, Evan, we're gonna nerf 3 cards. Can you tell me which cards? I don't know anything about Hearthstone. And I'd be like, well, just do it the Hearthstone way, flip a coin.
Auction Master Beardo, Gazlo, and Jeeves, done.
Yes, easy. So those were the 3 I picked, and yeah, South Sea Deckhand, almost more because I had to pick a 3rd card.
Sure.
Than because I think it's completely necessary, or because I think it would really do a lot to Pirate Warrior. But I do think that is something that Blizzard is looking at right now, is do we need to do anything about South Sea Deckhand? Because it does enable some gross things in some of the more degenerate strategies.
Yeah, it's true, definitely. It's been a role player for, since patches came out.
And then it's just also in Pirate Warrior, so it's like hard to feel bad about nerfing it.
Yeah, definitely. Patches is in an interesting spot. So I spent a lot of time thinking about ways you could tune patches, and there's not a lot of space you can move on that card.
I haven't bothered considering it because it seems so immovable.
Yeah, that's where I've hit, but I wanted to confirm that. You have to obviously you can't shrink toughness. You can't shrink power either, but. if you you could, but it'd be terrible. And if you take charge off, it's that's probably just not even remotely playable anymore.
It's like defeating the point.
Yeah,
he's in charge now.
Yeah, exactly. You lose all the flavor if you do that. They're gonna have to change everything about the card if you take charge off. So it's I think that they kind of hit a really narrow design space and sort of picked the element from that design space in patches. Which is cool.
Yeah,
I like it.
It is cool. I like it too, and I really don't think it's the problem with anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the card that it shows up in every game, so it's the one everyone notices. But I don't think it's the problem card. I think the problem cards are N'Zoth's first mate. Because if you play like Deckhand on turn 1 and get out your patches is not good enough to make that play worthwhile.
Right. It's I don't think that's something that Blizzard is considering nerfing, and I don't think it should be.
Yeah. So I think that we could probably move on to our next topic, which is related to balance decisions and hate cards and sort of deck choices. It's something we all do, or something that a lot of us do, which is look at data aggregation and discussion sites. So these sorts of websites, to name some examples, Vicious Syndicate is one that I mentioned, one that I really like. Hearthstone Top Deck is one that often displays the winning decks from tournaments.
Very handy.
Very good. There's, of course, Twitch, where you can go watch streamers. That's a really popular one.
Like me.
Yeah, absolutely. You can go follow Magnus here.
/Magnus57. Shameless self-promotion.
This is the place to do it.
Yes, this is half mine, so I get to do that.
Absolutely. So there's also Hearthpawn and Reddit. So those are 2 places which are kind of forums. Reddit is, of course, more in the forum territory. Hearthpawn is much more Hearthstone specific. Both of these places have a lot of discussion about decks and lists that you can look at and primers about decks, and good place to go and get a feel for what the community is doing and what they like and what's worked for people.
It's like a free-for-all than statistics. It's still valuable to look at. but it's definitely not the same as statistics.
No, it's different. And of course, also TempoStorm, which is just a website that does tier lists and stuff. But yeah, the Hearthpod and Reddit are definitely free-for-all discussion websites, but there's often useful information in there. The masses are dumb, but masses are also smart sometimes.
Yeah, small portions of them, and some of them share, which is very nice.
Yep.
And sometimes people even share other people's decks. Like they're like, oh, I saw a streamer playing this deck that was really good. So that's kind of nice. And you can read an explanation if you want. Like I'm pretty sure I didn't really get what was so good about Anyfin. Until I read something on Hearthpwn about it, or Hearthpwn, because I was just thinking about playing it the first time. I was like, that's pretty good. And then, as they were describing it, I was like, wait a minute. When you play the second Anyfin, you just obliterate them. No wonder there's, 2 Acolytes and the 2 Loot Hoarders and stuff in here.
Right.
I just didn't, why do we need to draw this fast? We're beating them down with Murlocs, I did not get what was going on.
Yeah, no, it's about playing that. So it's about playing the 2. 2 is
so that can be nice for those sites. And then if you really want to know, because it's so easy to get maybe distracted or tricked by what you experienced lately, because you're just one person. To avoid making bad calls because of that, you can look at actual statistics, and that's invaluable for sure.
Yeah.
And Vicious Syndicate definitely has a ton of that. I think TempoStorm also has some of that.
Yeah, TempoStorm does some stats. I think that a lot of people go there to look at their sort of their snapshots, their metagame snapshots, which are just tier lists. The tier lists can often differ pretty considerably between websites because tier lists are very often totally subjective.
It's a little arbitrary.
It is arbitrary. It's completely arbitrary. I mean, even if you're doing it with data, you're drawing arbitrary lines between win rates for tiers like Vicious Syndicate does. But ultimately, these types of websites can be really useful to go get. This is something. If you're listening to a podcast, chances are you already know this. These websites are really good to go get information about the metagame. But we want to discuss the fact that everybody else knows that. So not only do you know that, but everybody does, and that itself impacts the metagame. So
that is ultimately why there's a metagame.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is why, that's it.
So
that's why we have there wouldn't even be our podcast if it weren't for that.
Our podcast would be of much lower quality. We'd just be looking between our match history and be like, yeah, I lost to some rogues and some warriors, and I lost to a paladin who played a murloc. So
I guess there's not that many Murlocs around right now.
Yeah, exactly. I shouldn't run Hungry Grind, that's for sure. So let me just dust them.
I can't believe you did that.
I can. It was like a garbage card. I never thought I'd see play, but I was just dumb.
I would look through my collection. I would see it, and I'd be like, "You're gonna come around. You're gonna have your time. I see it in your eyes."
You definitely had way more foresight than I did.
And I was joking to myself every time I looked at it and didn't dust it. Partly, but I've seen it happen in Magic, so I knew it could happen eventually with this.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's Murlocs are finally doing something besides being resurrected en masse.
That's true.
Really, for the first time.
Yeah, so these websites often release reports. So Vicious Syndicate, they have the sort of weekly metagame reports that are quite good, and a lot of people wait for them. And when they're released, they often impact the metagame. So I've seen the people from VS talk about that a little bit on Reddit. Somebody sort of asked them, do you think that you guys are causing these decks to be super prevalent? And VS says, no, we don't think we're causing it. The top players will discover what's good regardless of whether we're around, and people will discover what's good. Everybody else will discover what's good whether or not we're doing what we're doing, but we do think we're making that happen faster. So,
yeah.
And I sort of agree with that. So, if you look at on sites like VS or something, they'll have these matrices with matchup win percentages, and if anybody has ever studied any economics or game theory, that should just right away remind you of the standard for standard representation of a game. That's exactly what this is. So you should see this matrix and know immediately there's a Nash equilibrium. There is some mixed strategy, some expected proportion of all of these decks, and eventually, just through sort of dumb trial and error, the population of people will discover one of the mixed strategy equilibriums, one of the correct proportions of these decks. So these decks will be as prevalent as they ought to be eventually. And these websites are just sort of speeding up the collapse into that sort of basin, if you will. Just finding
all the websites are, not just VS.
Absolutely, yeah. VS and Reddit and any website doing any sort of metagame discussion or metagame analysis at all is helping us get towards the Nash equilibrium for sort of proportion of any given deck. Very interesting. So
yeah, it's good to, I guess, pay attention to when the most popular websites are releasing, large amounts of information, because you can then go look at it knowing other people are also going to look at it, and then plan for that. That's sort of like extra information. Like, not only do you have the information from the website and all those stats, but you should then also consider, okay, all these other people see this, everyone sees what the best deck is yet another reason to seriously consider what's the best deck that beats that deck.
Absolutely.
I think that's a really good option, like when looking at a list of decks that are, competitive, and you're trying to decide which of these do I want to play. Playing the best one, great choice. Like, by the best one, I mean the one that has the best win percentage. Can't argue with that. Some people just inherently don't like to do that. Maybe you don't have the cards. Maybe you think the deck's bad, or you don't think it's fun, whatever. Playing a deck that ideally isn't much lower that beats it is another really good choice, especially like the day this data comes out.
Absolutely.
Like that is when it's going to have the biggest impact, and it's most likely that most people will just jump on the deck at the top of the list. So if you can run a deck or tech your deck to do better against that deck at the top of the list, it'll probably pay off a lot that day. So that's a way to really potentially really improve your win rate. Just if like this most recent VS statistics that you were showing me, which had Murloc Paladin at the top. Do you know when that was from? I think I might have closed it.
So this is from it's from May 4th, so it's just like 3 or 4 days ago.
Okay, so that means that lots of people are seeing that Murloc Paladin is winning a lot, so you can expect that decks that beat it, and just using Hungry Crab is probably a good idea.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of the interesting decision. Even if you see this, even if you just have a deck and you really like it, and maybe it's a homebrew that actually is working, you have something that works for you, and you see this report and you just don't want to play the decks on the top, knowing that like the majority of players in your rank are playing a given deck just tells you how to tech your deck.
Which is very useful information.
That's extremely useful information. That's the kind of information that actually pushes you over the edge into crafting the Hungry Crabs or putting Gorlaka Crawler into your build. It tells you, I'm going to run into Murloc Paladin, it's good, and these statistics say it's good, so it's going to become more prevalent, so I'm going to just start hating it. And then that night, you're just going to see an improvement in your win rate.
So I'm looking at now, 2 of the 4 Tier 1 decks, according to Vicious Syndicate. In this case, Tier 1 means it has, like, I don't know exactly how they determine this win rate, this win percentage, but above 52 is Tier 1. Murloc Paladin and Midrange Paladin are both sitting at the top. Both of them are Murlocs. Even Midrange Paladin always has 2 Hydrologists.
Oh, yeah.
Often also has a Curator, making it sort of like they have 3 Murlocs. So half of the top decks having Murlocs makes Hungry Crab look a lot better. And then another one up there right below those 2 is Pirate Warrior. That makes Gorlaka Crawler look a lot better. Then there's Secret Mage, So I guess that makes Eater of Secrets look better. But like that card is not as good as the other two. It's more of a, if you really get a lot of stuff, it's really good. And if it misses, it's really underwhelming.
Yeah,
I think that's the example of the kind of hate card that isn't good for the game.
Yeah.
As opposed to the crabs. So I don't really recommend playing Eater of Secrets.
I can't either. Yeah, it's quite narrow. It's not particularly. It's not a 2-mana 2/3 when it fails. It's not. Its fail case is pretty bad.
Yeah, it's much like decks are pretty fast right now. So if you spend your turn 4 playing a 2/4 vanilla, you probably lost.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
The meta isn't like there's definitely been past metas where you could like hero power pass on your 4th turn and not just lose. This is not the case right now.
Yeah, that might not be one of these.
You can rarely afford to do that. Even mid-range Paladin, which you could argue is maybe the slower or slowest of the tier 1 decks, like will build its board every turn, which is why it's so resilient against all these aggressive decks, and it will overwhelm you really fast because of that if you don't do anything about it.
Yeah, definitely. So that's so these sites can be really useful, and I think that this is related to a more general topic, sort of a bad word when it comes to card games, and that is net decking. So it's sort of it's derogatory. I mean,
how dare you use the internet to learn something?
It's unthinkable. Yeah, I mean, I play Magic weekly at a local store, and I play. I don't play tier 1 deck, but I definitely play a deck found on the internet. And yeah, people ask me if I net deck, and they give me those looks when you say like, oh yeah, this is a deck that this top 8 at a tournament. People don't want to hear that. So
no, you always get a scowl. One nice thing about Hearthstone is you can't see them scowling.
Unless you accept their friend request, but then you get a lot worse than that.
Oh my.
If Hearthstone taught me anything, it's you never accept a friend request.
Oh, I always do.
You're braver than I am. I actually had somebody salty friend request me after they beat me. I was pretty shocked about that.
They were a jerk?
Yeah, absolutely. They were really rude to me.
Hilarious.
I know. I was like, oh, all right, I'll accept this. I mean, how mean could they be? But no, they were mean.
But this is when it's much better when you beat them, and they salty friend request you, because then like they just say a bunch of stuff, and you're like, wow, you lost pretty badly, didn't you?
It's pretty good.
Like regardless, you just ignore anything they say, and be like, I'm sorry you lost so badly.
But I think you had some interesting things to say about net decking. So why don't you go into that, Evan?
Well, it's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with it.
It's like just like drugs.
It doesn't make you a bad person. I know what your friends might say, but if your friends told you to jump off a bridge, maybe you should. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that unless there's like candy down there or something. But if you see a deck on the internet and make an exact copy of it, that actually does a bunch of good things for you. You learn about how to beat a deck by playing it. If you look at a deck on the internet and make it and play it, you're probably hoping to win, and I hope you do, but you're also going to lose, and then you can see sort of what cards are important. Hopefully not only will you start playing with the deck better, but you'll also learn better how to beat it. So even if you don't really like the idea of net decking, you could still do it to counter net decking, essentially. If there is this tier 1 deck and you have the cards, it might be worthwhile to play some games with that deck, just like take a list from the internet. Or change, you can also change around a little bit. It's another great thing. You'll see, when they kill this guy, like when they kill my Murloc War Leader, I'm screwed. Or, when they dirty rat my minion out, I can't complete my rogue quest. You can figure out what cards are good and what strategies are good against this tier 1 strategy. And then you can go back to playing your homebrew or whatever you want, but you'll be equipped with this really useful knowledge about how to beat this really common, really strong deck, and that's one of the most important things to know. So that's just a great reason to net deck, because you know that that deck list is something that, like we were talking about, everybody's looking at, or lots of people are going to look at, and a lot of people are going to make something very similar to it. So even if you don't like it, you can still try it out to see how to beat it.
Yeah.
And you can rest assured that what other people are going to be playing is going to be a lot like that, because you know they're looking at exactly the same thing as you are.
Yeah, so in a lot of strategies for a lot of decks, control decks in particular, oftentimes your first order of business is determining what deck they're playing. So in Hearthstone, especially in this metagame, by turn 2 they've usually told you, but not always. And in some metagames that's not true, or there are decks that are subtly different from each other, and you need to know, oh, you're this variant of this control deck, or you're playing a deck where most likely you're going to try to kill me with this method as opposed to this method. So
yeah, it's so important to know that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, it tells you what, like, am I supposed to hold my Twisting Nether for N'Zoth, or is it okay for me to blow it right now on their Mountain Giant and their Faceless Shambler, or like does it not matter because they're just going to Leroy me? Like
that's how you win or lose games. You know, knowing the answers to those questions.
Absolutely. So oftentimes especially when you're playing Control, when you're playing a highly interactive deck, your first order of business is acquiring information about what your opponent's playing. Net decking, even just looking at lists, can help you determine that stuff. I mean, that seems obvious.
Just looking at them is very valuable.
It seems obvious, but it's like it's not a bad thing at all. I mean, even if you decide to go play those decks and you just want to play them so that you can win and get legend, you know, first of all, takes a lot more than just playing a list to do that well.
Yeah.
But it's totally fine, and there's still a lot of wiggle room even when you go on the internet and find a deck list. There's still like probably up to 5 slots in the deck that could be totally changed out for something else. And if you play it enough where you master it and you can identify those 5 slots on your own, you've learned a lot.
Yeah, and that's the other cool thing is, you know, you can personalize the deck by making your own choices, put your own tech in, and that will make the deck your own. So it's really not that you are mimicking someone and can't come up with your own ideas. You're just being inspired. You're using it as inspiration.
Yeah.
You're being an artist, and you're letting someone else's art inspire your art. And the other thing that I sort of was appreciating more recently was with this Quest Rogue deck. When I first built the deck, I did an exact copy of the deck I saw online, and even after playing it for like a day, it felt like the deck did not have any wiggle room for creativity, and that list was the only possible list. But as I played it, and as I watched other streamers play it, I started to see a bunch of changes and variations that were really cool and really innovative. And I even have recently been trying my own method of using Hungry Crabs, and not only the one Murloc that a lot of people have been playing, the Bylefin Tidehunter, which gives you a taunt minion, which is really good when you have the Crystal Core out. Getting a 5/5 taunt and a 5/5 for 2 mana. Or just blocking an Arcanite Reaper with a cheap minion. But the other Murloc that creates a Murloc, that's like something I just did on my own that I only came up with after having played the deck a while. So sometimes you can't find a good way to personalize a deck the moment you pick it up, but that's also okay. It's almost guaranteed that after you play it for a while, you're going to be like, all right, I know what I'm doing. That these things can go out and these things can go in.
Yeah, so I had a similar experience back in the early Mean Streets meta. So I jumped on the aggressive Shaman train with Small Time Buccaneers, and
it was a fun train.
Oh, it was a fun train, is absolutely right. That deck had such a high win rate against Pirate Warrior, at least in my hands. So I guess maybe I got lucky, but I identified after playing the list a lot, and I had just come off a month of playing mid-range Shaman, so I was like pretty shamaned out. I determined that I actually wasn't really too into Finley or Aya, and maybe you remember when I was talking to our group chat about that. I had asked everybody what they thought about Finley, and
Yeah.
mostly got a lot of positive responses. A lot of people saying like, "Oh, Finley's so good," and
I miss Finley.
I think Finley's great. I think it's an awesome card. I'm definitely not here to say Finley's bad, but I ultimately teched out both Aya and Finley for Thing from Below.
Right, I remember this.
And that was that at the time I felt like was a good metagame call, because in that early season there were so many aggro decks that were so strong. Being able to get that low cost of taunt would be so much more impactful than getting, say, Aya out on turn 5, where it's definitely more sticky and like more efficient overall, but in some matchups it's just not good enough to play a 5/3 for 5. So I was looking to instead be able to go a little bit deeper on my Spirit Claws and be able to hero power more and just, swing more games with a better than Fiery War Axe for 1 mana. But also, have the backup plan of playing a really cheap 5/5 taunt that's going to make my opponent's aggressive strategy a nightmare and make it easier for me to race. And ultimately, those techs were good enough.
Yeah, though I wound up doing the exact same thing after you told me about it, and I also had amazing results. Aya is definitely mostly really good against control, because it's got that durability.
Totally.
Versus Thing from Below, which is what you needed at the time. There's more aggro decks. Having those fat taunt butts was great. And then Finley is sort of also in the Shaman deck, mostly good against control also.
Oh yeah, gives you long game
because you
potential.
mostly want the Hunter hero power or just some way to get extra reach. The defensive hero powers really don't give you that much, or any hero power isn't really what you need to be doing to beat an aggro deck, which once again is more prevalent. So yeah, the things from those were just great. I think I also wasn't able to get legendary until I played that Shaman with the 2 things from belows.
Yeah, that list was definitely really helpful, and that was a tech decision that I couldn't have made, for one, without sort of picking up the aggro Shaman list on the internet and playing it a lot, playing just the exact list I found on the internet, which I thought was like perfectly tuned. I thought it was just this is it. But then you play it and you realize the cards you can take out and what you can replace them with, and then you can make a sick tech choice like that and actually get there. Do well enough. And that was an aggregation of sort of playing a lot to learn the deck, going on the internet, seeing what's popular, and determining a counterplay that I could make based on what was popular. So there were a lot of concepts there that led to that decision that it paid out for both of us. So
yeah, it was sort of like the basic premise sort of at the heart of it is that taunt minions are good against aggro decks.
Yeah, basically.
And then the more really it's a lot. There's much more subtlety to it than that. There's plenty of taunt minions. Why these? Turns out these are insanely good. 5/5s that you could potentially pay 2 mana for, really good. Why do you take these out? Well, turns out they're less critical to the strategy, and sort of another core thing is that slow minions with survivability are less relevant when your opponent's killing you really fast.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's something that was happening. So Aya was less relevant.
Yeah, so the kinds of cards that would, both Finley and Aya are cards that sort of get more value in the late game as the game goes longer. They help you build into a stronger late game because, Finley's just getting more value every time you press your hero power, and Aya is helping you advance your Jades. But sometimes you just need something that's going to help you right now, and you need to be able to make the game 2 turns shorter.
And you knew that was the case, both from experience, and from forums and discussions and looking at people's deck lists, and trying them yourself, and also looking at statistics.
Yeah, totally.
So these are all really important ways to improve your game, basically.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't, and you can do it your own way. You don't ever have to actually play a deck you see on the internet. You can always, change something slightly or just use the information to guide you into how to build your own deck personally. But I can't imagine really having any shot at getting legendary without doing these kinds of things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think that it's really important to both study and to sort of to study and research your competition, and this is one of the best ways to do it. I mean, it's just there's no better way to know what's in a deck and how the deck wants to play than to actually play yourself. And especially when a metagame gets old, that gets really, really important, because then particular card sequences matter a lot more. And if you can be very familiar with the card sequences, you can just get a perfect read on what's in their hand. And when you're in their head, when you're basically stream sniping your opponent without them knowing it, without them even streaming, then like you're gonna win. So being able to get as close as possible to that is great.
And that's also critical if you're going to want to have any shot at winning your bad matchups. You know, like a lot of what we're talking about is, you know, what decks are relevant and then what cards are good against them, or what decks are good against the other good decks. But ultimately, many games you're going to be playing, you know, like maybe a mirror match, or you're going to be playing against the deck that's good against you. But you still want to win. And knowing exactly how those decks work, and yeah, the card sequences, being really familiar with them, you'll have a much better idea of how to give yourself the best shot. You know, even if you still are less likely to win than you are to lose, you can still have those opportunities. Like, oh, they dropped their Murloc War Leader early. That's basically the one way I have to take advantage of this Murloc Paladin, is by getting that War Leader out early. They sort of gave me the one way I have of pulling this game out.
Right.
So I have to take advantage of it, and that's something that you understand a lot better, and you'll notice it a lot faster. You know, by looking at the deck list or even playing the deck.
Yeah, it's really important to know when your opponent stumbles, because that's how you salvage a bad matchup.
Exactly, and it will happen.
Oh yeah.
Or how to give them the chance to stumble.
Yeah, totally.
So it's almost the same thing, but both important and both, I think, fastest and most truly learned by playing the decks yourself.
Definitely.
Playing the deck yourself and trying to win yourself and noting when you can't and why.
It is ultimately very important. So I think we spent a pretty long time discussing quite a lot of topics.
Oh yeah, we've had a good yammer.
Oh yeah, definitely. So are you ready to call it?
Oh yeah, let's kill this bitch.
Great.
Kill this pig.
So where can everybody find you, Evan?
I am on Facebook, Magnus57, Twitter, Magnus_57, Twitch, Magnus57. You know, it's a nice prime number.
So you can find us, Last Turn. You can find us at soundcloud.com/lastturn, and I believe we're up on Google Play now, and we're going to put out some content rather steadily. You can find me at driller_HS on Twitter, and we're also going to get a Facebook page up and running pretty soon, and probably a specific Twitter account for Last Turn. But yeah, we're gonna get all social media up. Oh yeah, we're gonna be super social. I mean, it's 2017. that's the metagame in 2017. You got a net deck.
I guess we need an Instagram. I don't know how we take a photograph of a podcast, but we'll figure it out.
You just take a photograph of blowing people out in Hearthstone, I guess.
Everyone needs to do some kind of drugs that give them synesthesia, so they can look at a picture of the sound.
maybe YouTube is better than that. But anyway, thank you everybody for listening to Last Turn.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. We hope this has helped even in the slightest manner. And yeah, when we're on Twitter and Facebook, leave us some messages. And if you have specific topics you'd like to learn more about, or strategies you'd like to hear us talk about, or just call us, really sexy, do it. We're all ears.
Yeah, hit us up. We're definitely going to respond.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Goodbye, listeners.